So strange. I was over in Wasina this week at the coffee shop there working on my sermon for today. And I'd gone in, I'd ordered my coffee, I'd sat at the usual seat. I go to this coffee shop fairly regularly to work on sermon writing. And I was there, and there were other patrons, people working out business deals, people catching up with their friends, folks ordering their espressos and their nitro brew, whatever that is. And lo and behold, while I was sitting there, the door opened and Sin walked in. You know Sin, right? He's tall. He's always thin when I see him. Wears all black. He's got that Salvador Dali mustache, and I think he's bald on top, but he always wears a top hat when we're together. He had a scarf wrapped around his neck. It was 60 degrees outside, and he was wearing a scarf. I don't know, maybe he's used to warmer temperatures where he's from. And he came in, and he ordered an iced coffee, as Sin wants to do, and pulled up the chair across from me at my table. And he looked troubled. He looked down. And so I asked him if everything was okay. I was out on a walk with death this morning, he said. At this point, we looked out the window. I remembered, yeah, of course, Sin never leaves home without death. And so there was death, tied up to the light pole outside, big, furry, shaggy, infested, and infected. Everybody takes a wide berth around death when they encounter it on the sidewalk. I was out on a walk with death this morning. I was thinking about the good old days, Sin said. Life was so much simpler then, just me and Adam. It was so easy to get my disobedience business off the ground back then. Adam set the tone for you people so brilliantly. God gave him this incredible garden and only one command to follow, and he just couldn't be God's creature. He had to be the usurper. So he ate that forbidden fruit, and bam, we were in business, and business was booming. Every other one of y'all, after Adam, did the same thing in your own way. Ate that forbidden fruit, had to be the usurper, couldn't be the creature. And so we had all these stories. Prophets booming. Cain murdering his brother. Classic. All those wicked people in the days of Noah, we had to keep the business open all night in order to process all those sins. Towers to the heavens, man. You know those stories. They're great stories, Sin said. He paused and took a sip of his coffee. He looked out the window to make sure that death hadn't run off without him. Would you say that the times have changed? I asked him. I think so, he replied. No, there was definitely a bump in the road with that whole Mount Sinai thing. It really messed us up. Before that, there was no regulation for how Death and I did our business. No laws. We operated totally under the radar. But then these stone tablets, Moses, stinking Moses, coming down with God's will in written form. That was tough. I had to undergo a total reorganization of how I do business when those tablets came down. And so I got a copy of the law, and I studied it, and I realized, you know what, hey, I think I can work with this. And so, you know how rules and regulations are. There's always a loophole. There's always some sort of offshore account, some kind of hidden practice, bury the waste. And so I just started labeling the sins now that we had names for them. So revenge was on aisle 6, murder was on aisle 3. I had a whole section set up to the side for lies. Looked like a Hallmark card display. You could get a lie for your father, a lie for your wife, a lie for your nephew. Wherever kind of lie you needed, we had them right there on display for everybody. And so really what happened, I didn't even realize, but I was able to use the law to expand my market. Because you know what you can do with the law and the power of sin is you can get people to start judging each other based on how well they're doing what God wants. And buddy, when we got that going, it was like we'd never had that hiccup. Folks were judging each other, casting each other out, debating whether somebody was kind enough or generous enough, obsessing over the rules around Sabbath observance. It It was great. People who wanted status, people who wanted power, people who wanted to preserve their life, protect their families, they came to me. I was selling, and they were buying. Wars, idols, temple destruction, wicked kings. It was good. I'd get death to go out there and threaten people, to scare them and get them back in line. It was a great way of life for the two of us. I couldn't hold off at this point. I said, Sin, you know I'm a Christian, right? I know, he interjected. He was touchy about that, defensive, sharp temper, that Sin. But he said, look, I need a pastor right now. Can you just listen to me, please? I had it figured out. People came in order to feel like they mattered. They want power. I can give you some violence to get rid of your enemies. You want wealth? I can help you craft a business that maximizes your profits to the destruction of your employees and workers. You want value? I can make you beautiful, the envy of everybody else. I got so good at operating in this system, Sin said, that everybody thought this was the status quo. They just thought this is how the world worked. My favorite thing that humans ever say is when somebody does something wrong and they excuse it by saying, well, he's only human. Oh, buddy, Sin said, that's when I know I've got a monopoly. We don't even expect people to be good. We excuse my way as normal. It's just the best. Until Jesus. Jesus and that grrr. That grace, don't say that word. Can't stand it. That ruined everything. Way worse than the law of Moses for death and me. Healing lepers, eating with tax collectors, feeding the hungry, teaching forgiveness instead of revenge, talking about how this present way of things isn't the eternal will of God. I couldn't take it. I wanted Jesus to do what every other person since Adam had done, but he refused to usurp God's power and remain faithful to God's ways no matter what happened. Nobody had ever done that before or since. So I let death off the leash. And I thought we handled it pretty good. We got the Romans involved. We got the Jewish leaders involved. We even got Jesus' closest friends involved. Betray him, deny him, abandon him. It was perfect. Look what happens, Jesus, when you offer these free gifts of that. You get hung on a cross. You don't run things around here. But I said, he rose from the dead. I know. He rose from the dead. Death had an absolute fit. I like to think I could have never calmed him down after that. And after that, rising from the dead, my operation started to die. I've been in a perpetual going out of business sale now for some 2,000 years. Now, don't get me wrong, folks still come in and shop around some. You people love a good bargain. But I've tried. I tried Rome to bring these Christians down. Throw them to the lions. You know what they did in the arena? They prayed and praised God. So I decided I'll get folks to hurt them, betray them, lie to them. You know what those Christians did? They forgave them. So I tried oppression and poverty and destruction of the earth, and they just kept clothing the hungry, feeding the naked, taking care of the planet and each other. And so it's all futile. I'm really the victim here. I am the victim of God's righteousness. That has destroyed me. And Sin stood up. He walked out of the coffee shop. He untethered death from the light pole, and they walked up over the Wasina Bridge toward Old Southwest. You believe me? Some of you have absolutely no idea what's been happening in this sermon for the last 10 minutes. And others of you know all too well, because you've had this same conversation with sin. You know that you've got a punch card for how many times you've gone to the clearance sale at sin's going out of business sale, the way we lie, betray, harm, and abuse. You know that we've joined the Romans and the Sanhedrin and Judas and Peter, and we too, by our unwillingness to see the reign of God, hung Jesus on that cross. And we excuse our behavior by saying things like, well, we're only human. But somewhere along the way, Jesus finds us. And he says, don't you know that you don't have to shop in the sin store anymore? My gift of grace is free. I've brought you into the righteousness of God. And that story of grace is not just some hypothetical fairy tale. It's real. It changes real people. There was a young boy in eastern North Carolina. He came from a rural family. There was addiction in the home, abuse, hunger. There was not much structure, no security. School was coming to an end that school year. He was in elementary school. Mom needed something to do with him when summer break came. And she saw out on the highway, on the country road near where they lived, a banner, one of those big canvas banners advertising a local country church's vacation Bible school. She said, "Oh, great. That doesn't cost anything, and they have to take my kid for the days that they have him. So we'll sign him up. That'll get him off my hands for a few days." So she signed him up. Now, on the first day, she dropped him off at Vacation Bible School. And he went inside, nervous, curious. And there were people there that welcomed him. And they remembered his name. They taught him to sing. They gave him a snack. And they shared with him the stories of Jesus. And he learned in those stories that Jesus never hit anybody. Jesus didn't leave people hungry when they were in his care. Jesus didn't ignore those who were suffering in their bodies or in their minds. He was drawn to that. He asked one of the other boys at the Bible school at the end of that week, "Could I come to church with you?" When this guy recounted this story to me, he said, "It was a Baptist church. If you ask any Baptist to give you a ride to church, you better believe they will be there every single week." And so he got a ride every Sunday to church with this friend. And there at that church, there were people who were bold enough to ask him about the bruises that he wore on his body, who snuck an extra piece of fruit or a granola bar in his coat pocket when he wasn't looking, or in his backpack when he came for youth group. And as that little boy grew, he realized that he didn't have to be what he was learning he was at home. He didn't have to continue that pattern, that cycle of destruction. He had another identity that was not wrapped up in hurt and anger and generational abuse. He'd been claimed in the cross of Jesus Christ and didn't belong to the powers of sin and death, but to the powers of grace and righteousness. And right now, this very moment, several hundred miles from here, that boy, now a man, is standing in a pulpit that looks an awful lot like this, in a black robe like this, preaching to his congregation of people like you, saying that the gift is greater than the trespass. that we don't have to shop at the going out of business sale of sin anymore, that grace is the free gift and we can live by that grace. And he says that because he has experienced it. So keep your eyes open. Sin's out there. He's lonely, looking for somebody to talk to. He might show up in your living room or at the coffee shop or while you're walking the dog, maybe sit next to you even in the pew on Sunday morning. He's going to want to talk. Remember the good old days, Adam's disobedience and Jesus' obedience. I'd encourage you to listen to his story because we need to remember. Because we remember that gift of grace that comes to us freely. And as we remember, we come to embody that grace in real ways in our life. As we hear the story again, disobedience destroyed by one's obedience, sin and death overwhelmed by unrelenting love. All of a sudden, we're part of that story too. And it's not a far-off fairy tale. It's a real way of living in a world where there are bruises and hunger and loneliness and fear. Jesus has claimed us to live rightly before God and to love our neighbors. It's a free gift of grace. Welcome that gift. Amen.